Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. And today we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. And we might also talk a bit about what is happening in Israel as well. So, first, my youngest son has just departed for his basic military training. And this will be his first full day, so hopefully I'll hear from him at some point. Let me know that he is there. And then eventually I anticipate on going to his graduation as well. Now, with that being said, I got to talk about something that disturbed me a little bit. So, some of you may watch other content providers, right? Now, there is another content provider that covers the Ukrainian-Russian war, and that is Dennis Davydov. In his latest video, very interesting comment that he made. I would say this is a lesson in hypocrisy. It is a lesson in the pot calling the kettle black. He stated, and he was comparing and contrasting the Israeli mobilization versus the Russian mobilization. So he was referencing that the Israelis were having essentially a fairly smooth mobilization with its 300,000 soldiers, whereas the Russians were dragging fighting-age males into its military, while more than what was being drafted was then leaving the country out of fear. Right? Leaving the country, fleeing the country because they didn't want to get drafted, which is exactly what he did as a Ukrainian. He fled the Ukraine, the borderlands, because he did not want to get conscripted. So how does that work? On one hand, you are throwing stones at the Russian military for conscripting forces, conscripting males into the military, and stating that many of those males that were brought into the military, many of those males who fled Russia, did not want to be in the Russian military, when he did the exact same thing. He was smuggled out of Ukraine. He did not leave Ukraine. We know this for a fact. He did not leave Ukraine through legal means. He was smuggled out because he wasn't supposed to leave. And there you have it. So, very interesting to see that kind of comment. And again, it's just really deplorable, and especially from where I sit, having served in the military, having sons in the military, and knowing that my tax dollars are going to the Ukrainian military while cowards flee the country. Man, you even have Americans and other country and other persons from other nation states going to fight in Dennis Davydov's stead. Reprehensible. Really is. Anyway, so where are we at today? So again, as we have talked about for the last couple of months now, again, the Ukrainian offensive has failed. It has stalled. It's not going anywhere. So we will probably see some sort of stalemate through the winter months. We may see limited offensive operations by Russian forces, by Ukrainian forces. But again, the major thrust south of Orikhiv, to the west of Volhodar, near Staromayorsky, those operations have essentially failed. Done. So at this point, I think it's safe to say we will see a period, I don't want to say a period of lull. The fighting will be intense at times. We are starting to see the Russians expand their drone capability by attacking Ukrainian air bases, forward air bases, up to 70 kilometers behind the front line with these newer Lancet drones that the Russians are manufacturing. So very interesting to see that. Another issue I wanted to talk about was a reported rebellion in the Ukrainian military. Yeah, a rebellion in the Ukrainian military. It has been played down quite a bit. But what we have heard is that this unit here, the 47th Mechanized Brigade, it had its commander killed earlier. Another commander took over. Then that commander apparently was dismissed of duties, apparently because the Ukrainian political apparatus and NATO did not like the success rate at which the 47th was prosecuting its offensive operations south of Kharkiv. So that commander was then sacked, and they brought in another commander. Allegedly, that commander was then demanding that military occupational specialties such as individuals who man artillery weapon systems, supply personnel, he demanded that those individuals grab a rifle and become infantry. And we're using rear area personnel and personnel who were trained in other, again, military occupational specialties within the Ukrainian armed forces and immediately converting them over to infantry. Now, is that something that just never happens in war? Actually, it happens quite a bit. It actually happened in the U.S. military. Many people aren't aware of this, but I was a tanker. I operated a main battle tank. In Iraq, our units were transitioned from main battle tanks to what they call, quote-unquote, dragoons. So they took our main battle tanks from us, and they, in these specific units, let me clarify. Fortunately, I did not have to become a dragoon. But there were tank battalions that were converted into these dragoon units. Essentially, a four-man tank crew was put into a up-armored Humvee, and they became motorized infantry. That has happened even in the U.S. military. Now, what's happening obviously in Ukraine is a bit different. That in Iraq, dealing with an industrial strength insurgency campaign, this you are engaging as infantry a oppositional force, meaning the Russian military that has air power and is absolutely not an industrial strength insurgency. So again, and that is what caused allegedly this rebellion in the 47th Mechanized Brigade. And there's been a host of issues that has now fallen upon this 47th Mechanized Brigade. It has taken a lot of casualties, and right now its fighting ability has to be questioned, especially with what's happening internally. Another issue I wanted to talk about, and this is something that really befuddles me, and I've seen it on both sides of the conflict, and that is the videos that you see of individual tanks operating as one. You see one tank operating by itself, using tactics that would be reminiscent of such as what is that tank video game? or thunder, right? Or thunder. As a armored crewman, I can tell you with absolute certainty, there was never one time in my experience in the U.S. Army where I operated alone as a main battle tank. At worst case scenario, you operated in a section of 2 tanks. Most of the time, the vast majority of the time, you operated in platoons and company-sized elements. So I had the opportunity to watch a recent video clip. I obviously can't show it because of YouTube's censorship issues. But you see a T-90, a modernized T-90 Russian main battle tank. And it's operating in a open field. It's moving forward, back, left, right. Doing the whole War Thunder thing, right? And eventually, it takes a hit. Looks like to its right flank, and it catastrophic boom. It's destroyed. Turret goes flying, and I don't get that. I don't understand why on earth the Russians are operating these tanks by themselves. Again, you would never see that. You would see, again, from the U.S. military, you would see something called bounding overwatch, where you would see 2 tanks usually moving forward, and then there would be a 2-tank section to the rear observing in front of those 2 tanks that are advancing forward. And you would do the same thing with platoons as well, or companies. So you could have a company-sized, or I'm sorry, a platoon-sized element, 4 tanks, observing downrange, while an element of 4 tanks maneuvered towards the enemy. So if you started to receive fire, the stationary tanks in that overwatch position would be able to apply firepower to those forces that would be engaging the bounding unit, the unit that is maneuvering. But again, the whole concept of this lone tank operating in this field, I don't get it, don't understand it. Maybe someone with knowledge of Russian doctrine, with what's happening on the ground now, and we've seen it on the Ukrainian side as well. We've seen these individual tanks operating by themselves, which again is something that you would just never ever see from the U.S. military. Now, you may see a U.S. Main battle tank in a observation post type position, maybe in a hull down position. It's in a defensive position, and maybe there's some videos out there showing that where you can't see the other tanks. But again, that doesn't mean that tank is operating by itself. And I could be wrong, and maybe that Russian tank, that T-90 that was recently destroyed, was operating with other main battle tanks. But I didn't see them. And again, 100 yards to its right, 100 yards to its left, because of the drone footage that was being used, you could clearly see the tank was operating by itself. And I can tell you that if you are moving in a tank, and I don't care how good the stabilization is in your tank, if you're a gunner and you are on the move and you are going backwards and forwards and all over the place, and you are not on a road, it's going to be more difficult to identify targets. Much more difficult. Rather than in a stationary position. Even us in the U.S. military, you always hear about the ability of the Abrams ability to shoot on the move. Most of the firing that we did was stationary. We would stop. We would stop, we'd look around, we would shoot, and then usually you would then pull out of that dust cloud that was formed, and you would move forward, slow down to a creep, allow the gunner to get a good sight on the target he was shooting at, and then engage the target. So again, much more difficult to, as a tank gunner, to, even with a stabilized system, to fight in that tank while moving. It can be. Some were better than others, gunners. But again, that's kind of where we sit right now. Obviously, a lot of what is happening in Ukraine is in the shadows now because of what's happening in Israel. Obviously, the mainstream media is very much focused on what is happening in Israel, and we anticipate that will continue as that war escalates. And we will, too, cover that conflict here as well, but we will also continue to cover the conflict between the Russian Federation and the Ukraine. So that's where we sit. Feel free to comment in the comment section. As always, thanks for joining us. More to come very, very soon. And as always, have a good day. And Davydov, you're a coward, dude. Seriously. Out of here.